The Texas National Guard told migrants approaching the razor wire barricade to turn around to Mexico. The United States government is suing Texas, arguing its agents need access to this 2.5-mile stretch of land.
Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. Are we headed for civil war? That was the first thought that came to my mind when I saw Governor Greg Abbott's statement, essentially taking a stand against the Biden administration and defending Texas's borders. I'm sure everybody has heard of this by now. But that was the first thought that came to my mind was, are we headed for civil war? And I mean that seriously. I'm taking it dead seriously because things are ramping up, as we know, and people are taking a side. This country is more polarized than I think it has ever been. Now, how did this conflict arise? Texas installed some razor wire on its border, and the Biden administration sued Texas to take it down, claiming that it was the federal government's job to handle the border and that Texas didn't have the right to do that. The Fifth Circuit Court, which generally tends to rule in a more conservative way. I don't like really using conservative versus liberal when it comes to court rulings because that doesn't really apply very well. But the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court issued an injunction against the U.S. government, essentially saying, stop what you're doing. Texas has the right to do this. Stop. Wasn't a ruling on the merits. That particular injunction was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was that injunction only that the Supreme Court ruled on January 22nd in an order. It wasn't a ruling on the merits. It was not a final ruling in the case. It was an order specifically about the injunction, which got a lot of people very, very angry, especially because Catholic Chief Justice John Roberts, as well as Amy Coney Barrett, sided with the majority in vacating that injunction, essentially lifting the ban on the U.S. government and allowing it to move forward with removing that razor wire. Now, 4 of the justices, Kavanaugh, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, 3 of them practicing Catholics, the other conservative Episcopalian, would have, they disagreed. They would have kept that injunction in place. And so, shortly after that, we have the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, issuing his statement, kind of the shot heard round the world. And he invoked Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, which states, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. He essentially accused the Biden administration of failing in its duty, as laid out in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, where it says the United States shall protect each of them, meaning each of the states, against invasion. Governor Abbott has declared that what's taking place at the southern border is an invasion. This is what he wrote. Quote, I've already declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. Let's take a listen to what Governor Abbott had to say recently on Fox News.
Texas has a right as a state to stop criminals from coming into our state, to make arrests of those criminals. And we have National Guard as well as Texas Department of Public Safety officers who are there to make those arrests and to deny illegal entry. And Joe Biden actually does have an option here. Joe Biden's option is to enforce the laws of the United States and stop this illegal entry.
And the governor is standing by what he said. We got video here of the Texas National Guard in action at the border.
Neil, Texas is not backing down, reinforcing areas with even more razor wire in areas that migrants have frequently climbed over, just like we saw this morning. Fox News drone captured 30 migrants climbing onto a shipping container, using some of that clothing to protect themselves from the razor wire. Texas DPS waited on the other side to arrest the group for criminal trespassing.
Some political opponents are spreading fake news. For instance, you have Beto O'Rourke, who is saying, quote, Abbott is using the Texas Guard to defy a Supreme Court ruling. As lawyers have pointed out to Beto, he's wrong. The Supreme Court did not tell Texas it could or could not do anything. It simply lifted the injunction against the Biden administration, saying that it could indeed take down the razor wire, but it said nothing about Texas either way. So Texas is not actually defying any Supreme Court ruling. And like I said, this is not a ruling in the case. It's an order. It's not a legal ruling on the merits, which may come next year. And until that time, the worry for people in Texas is how many more illegal immigrants are we going to allow to flood across our border? Now, before anybody accuses me of racism or being against immigrants or being mean or uncharitable and not welcoming the stranger, none of that's true. Total hogwash. I myself am an immigrant. I come from an immigrant family. Many of you know my background. We essentially had to flee communist Vietnam. And we were able to get on a plane to France because of our French citizenship passed down from my father, my grandfather, who was a colonel in the French army, through to my mother. And that allowed us essentially our passage to freedom, our ticket to freedom. And so we lived in France for a few years, and then we came to the United States. I became a legal U.S. citizen at age 10. I went through the process legally, as did my entire family. We sponsored other families from Vietnam to escape communism, and they came here also legally and became U.S. citizens legally. The emphasis on legal. Also, we're law-abiding, productive citizens. There are truly heart-wrenching stories about families being separated at the border. There are truly, horrible stories about families trying to escape crime or poverty in Mexico or Central America, South America. I'm aware of that. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But let's not pretend that this flood of illegal immigrants that we're allowing into our country is not also greatly harming the country. Later on, I'm going to go through some of the statistics with regard to child trafficking, human sex trafficking, fentanyl, opioids, the drug cartels, all sorts of things. But Texas is getting a great deal of support. Right now, as we speak, we have a massive truckers convoy heading to Texas. This was a convoy that had originally been planned to start from June 29th to last through February 3rd, and making stops in places like Eagle Pass, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, and San Diego, California, among other places. But massive group heading down. It's supposed to be very peaceful convoy, expressing their solidarity with Texas and with the states dealing with the crisis, and it is a crisis, as even Democrats will admit, at the border. Multiple states at this point. Take a look at this map. As of this taping, these are all the states that are standing by the Texas governor. You've got Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Ohio, Tennessee, West Virginia, Virginia, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, and then add Louisiana. That is, as of this taping, those numbers could, of course, increase. Now, General Mike Flynn has written an article saying that the Constitution does indeed grant the Texas governor the right to defend his borders in the way that he has. This is what Flynn said. Biden has not just failed in that duty miserably, meaning failed in his duty to protect the border from invasion. He chose not to honor that duty. In such cases, the Constitution allows states to use force up to and including war to repel invasion. So the question, of course, is this an invasion? The Texas governor certainly seems to believe so. He declared it an invasion. We know that 51 Texas counties have indeed declared it an invasion. We know that 2 million illegals are living in Texas, and they're suffering from that. Again, a number of them, I'm not saying are not productive citizens, but there's no doubt there are crimes, all sorts of crimes, drugs being trafficked across the border into the state of Texas. People are dying as well from rapes, assaults, murders. I've actually spoken to Texas residents who talk about renters who have property bordering the southern border, and they routinely come across corpses from illegal immigrants crossing the border, and they're dying for various reasons, either from exposure, thirst, starvation, sexual assaults, murders, all sorts of things. It's a terrible situation down there. One of the governors who is supporting Governor Abbott is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. This is what he had to say.
If the Constitution was originally understood to mean that a state could not protect itself against an invasion, that the federal government could force a state to allow an invasion, the Constitution would have never been ratified in the first place. Texas would have never joined the Union when it did. You also have a situation where liberal jurisdictions over many, many years have been sanctuary jurisdictions against enforcing federal immigration law. So you'll have somebody who's a criminal alien, they will not be given over to ICE, and they will deliberately act to frustrate the laws on the books, and somehow that's viewed as okay. You have Texas, who's acting to enforce the laws on the books, to ensure that they have a secure state and that we have a secure country. So all of this is just nonsense what Biden's doing. Texas has every right to stand its ground. In Florida, we've been sending people to help for many years now, because we understand it's not just a Texas issue, it's ultimately an American issue. And if we don't have sovereignty in this country, then we're not going to be a country anymore.
All right, so let's take a look at the timeline. Within hours of Biden being sworn in as president, one of the first acts he did was to halt the construction of Trump's border wall. He claimed that that border wall was essentially useless, that it was a massive waste of money, that wasn't really doing very much to protect the security of U.S. citizens. So at the time, it cost about $11 billion. But experts estimate that the cost of taking care of the millions of illegal immigrants that are crossing our border will be $450 billion. That's just in money. That's just the cost in money. We haven't spoken about the cost in lives affected. Since Biden, about 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed the border, and they keep coming. We know that he wants more to come in. That population, 6 million people, that's more than 22 states in the United States. I hope you're enjoying the show. No, this is not the part where I tell you the rest of the show is behind the paywall. In fact, I'm hoping to make all my episodes free. If you haven't signed up for our email, please do so by visiting StellaMaris.media and signing up. I've got a number of projects I'm excited about at Stella Maris Media, but we are entirely self-funded. So if you are able to give, go to StellaMaris.media and click on Support Our Work. Thanks so much for watching, and back to the show. We know that one of the things that is being trafficked across the border are children. Anybody who's seen Sound of Freedom, and don't pay any attention to the nonsense written by liberal media that this was some QAnon conspiracy. It's not a QAnon conspiracy. We know for a fact that child sex trafficking is being facilitated across the southern border, and that open borders helps the child traffickers very, very well. We know that the U.S. government is very invested in bringing people across the border. Now, they claim ostensibly it's to help, and I'm sure in many cases it is. But we also know in many cases that's actually facilitating child sex trafficking. I did a show where I featured a whistleblower, a government whistleblower, who was involved in helping to place children here in the United States. And to her great shock, she found out that the Department of Health and Human Services was actually helping to facilitate child sex trafficking. She reported very suspicious cases of children being brought across the border and placed in homes where they're actually being prostituted out. And HHS essentially told her to be quiet, and they kicked her out. She testified before Congress. I interviewed her. Please watch that interview. It is amazing what our own government is doing. And you know what else? Who else is taking part in this? As people have talked about, allegedly Catholic charities. There's a massive amount of money involved, billions of dollars involved in facilitating this. Now, again, it is ostensibly to help house and place immigrants. But too often, what we have is we have children coming across the border, very often alone, with a name tag on them. And then some person who claims that they're the child's relative picks them up. And then they take them to who knows where to do who knows what. We know a number of those cases. Some of those children are being forced into prostitution. Many of them end up homeless and dead. There's a massive price tag for each of these children that benefits Catholic charities and other NGOs and nonprofits, and it benefits the government as well. Like I said, go watch that show because it's very, very eye-opening. But that's what an open border helps to facilitate: child sex trafficking. We know the U.S. is the number one destination for child sex trafficking. But where are they coming from? Where are these children coming from? Are they coming from the country north of us? The northern border, Canada? No, not primarily. They're coming primarily from the southern border, from Mexico, Central America, countries in South America. That's where they're coming from. And like I said, open borders helps to facilitate all of that. Then we have the problem, of course, of drugs. As we know, there's an opioid crisis in this country. More than 100,000 people die from overdoses every single year. A lot of them fentanyl, about 70% fentanyl. And where's fentanyl coming from? A lot of it's coming from China. A lot of it's coming from Mexico. Again, open borders helps to facilitate that. You have so many drug cartels and sex cartels that are getting rich off having an open border. Let me read some stats to you. Last year, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol arrested 35,433 aliens with criminal convictions or outstanding warrants nationwide, including 598 known gang members, 178 of those being MS-13 members. Anybody who knows anything about MS-13, they're probably the most feared gang in Mexico, truly evil. Many of them are Satan worshipers. Many of them have said, including people who have gotten out of the gang, have said that they are required to sacrifice individuals to Satan, murder individuals as a sacrifice to Satan. Customs and Border Patrol also seized 27,293 pounds of fentanyl coming across the southwest border, enough to kill more than 6 billion people. There are 8 billion people living on the planet right now. It was enough to kill 6 billion people, and that's just here, trafficked into the United States. Do we or do we not care about the citizens of this country? This administration seems far more invested in getting itself involved in squabbles and fights in other countries out there, while we have citizens here dying every single day over just the fentanyl, the opioid crisis alone. And where is the help for them? So the big question is, why, when we know that there are so many harms, so much suffering, so much death being allowed by this open border policy and bringing in this influx of outsiders, why is it that the Biden administration is so invested in doing this? Why? Well, I think Tucker Carlson made some very trenchant points. Let's take a listen.
Yale University released a study last week by 3 researchers, all of them liberal, I believe, who concluded that the actual number of illegal aliens in this country is not 11 million, it's north of 22 million. 22 million. Fact 1. Fact 2. The Democratic Party is now, as a matter of policy, calling for the legalization of all illegals in this country, citizenship voting rights, 22 million new voters. Fact 3, the overwhelming majority of first-time immigrant voters vote Democrat. Fact 4, the largest margin in American presidential history was 17 million votes, 1984 election between Mondale and Reagan.
And Reagan, yeah.
17 million. You would add to our voter rolls 22 million, at least, permanent electoral majority in perpetuity. That's what this is about. It's not about making the country better, serving our labor needs, helping the population. It's about putting Democrats in power forever. That is the truth of our immigration debate.
It's to maintain power. And this is not about Democrats versus Republicans. Not at all. I know that there are evil people among the Republicans too. Like I said, there's corruption on both sides. There's corruption in all political parties. There's no one particular party that I exalt over another. Again, this is not about Democrat versus Republican. This is about people, evil people, who want to maintain their grip on power. And you find them everywhere. But that's what this is about. That's what this is about. So, is a civil war coming to the United States? I know that there are a lot of people who are very gung-ho and excited about the opportunity that we're finally taking a stand against this evil administration. I myself cannot look at this with excitement or happiness, because I always know that the people who suffer the most are the innocent. It's always the innocent who suffer. And I'd never be excited about the prospect of war, of bloody conflict. Never. Because it means many people die. And we've tried it before. The Civil War was hands down the bloodiest conflict in the history of the U.S. Out of all the conflicts the U.S. has ever been involved in, all the wars, the Civil War was absolutely the bloodiest. And it was also the most tragic because it was Americans fighting against Americans. Are we facing that again? Americans fighting Americans. We already know that this administration it doesn't have a problem with turning on its own citizens. We already know that. We already know that this government doesn't have a problem with taking advantage of human tragedy and human crisis to increase its power. Look at what happened during the pandemic. Look at what happened. I am not in any way minimizing the death, the suffering, and the loss of those who did die from COVID, especially the elderly and those who were compromised. Their immune systems were compromised because they were the most vulnerable to this. So I'm not in any way minimizing that. I know people, I have friends who died because their immune systems were compromised and they couldn't withstand COVID. But we know for a fact that this administration and multiple state administrations as well, they reveled in their power grab. They absolutely took advantage of this crisis to increase their power. These draconian lockdowns that happened in states, numerous states across the country, including this one here in Michigan, Governor Whitmer abusing her power and a court finally striking her down and saying, you are abusing your authority as governor. Finally, placing an end to her massive power grab. But she wasn't the only one. Other governors as well. The way that people who refused to take the vaccine were punished, treated as outcasts and second-class citizens, not allowed to travel, in some cases fired from their work, fired from their positions, whatever they may be. Thank God that a number of them fought back in the courts, and the courts agreed pretty much unanimously with these groups, especially those that were denied their religious exemptions. This is an open violation of our rights under the U.S. Constitution. We cannot be forced to take this questionable vaccine that people are continuing to question to this day, its efficacy as well as its harmfulness, especially if you have objections based on your faith. And thank God the courts agreed with that. So we have seen how this government does not have a problem with turning on its own citizens. Look at the way that it's treated the January 6th protesters. I'm not talking about the violent protesters, okay, because there were a handful. But there's also very compelling evidence that some of those violent protesters were either Antifa, dressed up as Trump supporters, or federal agents themselves, dressed up as Trump supporters. I mean, the whole thing is very murky. It's not black and white the way that some people are trying to paint it. And there are people right now who are still rotting away in prison over this, who did nothing more than commit the so-called crime of walking around the Capitol. It's outrageous. And the scary thing is that we know the federal government has such a massive military arsenal that it could easily wipe out the states, easily. I mean, it's not even a contest. The U.S. military arsenal versus each state's National Guard military. That's why I don't look with joy or excitement at the prospect of a coming civil war, because I see horror ahead. I see tragedy. I see massive deaths. And when you're dealing with a government like this that really does not seem to have a problem whatsoever in turning on its own citizens, the whole thing becomes scary. The whole process becomes frightening, especially for someone like me, a mother of multiple children. So what can we do as Catholics? I mean, what's the supernatural perspective in all of this? Well, as always, we pray. We pray, and then we make sure that we're in the state of grace, that we're right with God. Make sure our family, our children are right with God. Make sure you're living a virtuous life. And pray. Pray for this nation. I mean, who knows? If there is a civil war coming, it might be the scourge that God is sending upon this nation because he's been so grievously offended for so long by all the wickedness and all the evil that we've been committing against him for so long. And he's very mercifully held back the full weight of his wrath. But who knows? I mean, this could be a scourge. This could be a scourge from God. I'm praying that it doesn't happen. I'm praying it doesn't come, because like I said, it could be a horror on a huge scale that we haven't seen before. Not to end on such an apocalyptic note, but like I said, when I saw that statement by the governor, the first thing I thought was, are we headed towards a civil war? And right now I don't really have any answers for you. I'm just sort of sitting here talking with you, thinking things through, thinking it out, and just wondering about the prospect and counseling you to be prepared. All we can do, like I said, is we pray, keep a watchful eye on things, and just make sure you're right with God, your family's right with God, and do everything that you can to help everybody else get right with God. You can always write me with tips, suggestions, or questions at stellamarismedia@proton.me. And if you've not signed up for emails, please visit stellamaris.media. That's stellamaris.media. Sign up and I will make sure that you're updated with the latest news, events, posts, and of course, videos. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.